show, you've seen the format and how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. We're just gonna have a conversation, man. I want to get to know you. My audience is all entrepreneurs, primarily leaders, entrepreneurs. I've been getting a lot of DMs from corporate people who are looking to leave corporate. So I'm getting a lot of those as well. So we may jump into that space. The soft flow of the show, Andre, is origin story. Kind of want to get to know you a little bit who you are, and then we're gonna really just dive into the core of your brand, the core of your business. I want to know about your leadership style. I want to learn about who you are from mistakes and failures and the lessons you've learned from those and all those sorts of things. And so I'll follow your flow in that space. I
Okay,
would
cool.
ask that if you have something that's going to be really long-winded, try to encapsulate that because there's a lot of stuff I want to cover in 60 minutes and I don't want to have to cut you off and be like, let's move on to the next question because that's just counterproductive for the show.
Okay, cool.
All right, cool. All right, then we'll just jump right into it. So I always ask the opening question I always ask everybody who comes on the show is if you had to encapsulate your journey from young boy to grown man and who you are in the 30,000 altitude, just talk to me a little bit about how you got from where you started to where you are. Was there a corporate journey? Was there a college? Was there trade school? Just give me the down and dirty on who you are right now.
Yeah, I think who I am today is really finally fulfilling what I wanted to do as a kid and what I really wanted to be. So when I was in school, I wanted to be a writer and wanted to be writing with Rick Riley and Sports Illustrated and doing that kind of stuff. And so I went to college, and it was a funny story. My professor, after 2 years in journalism school, grabbed me and put a big red "See Me" after class. And I walked into his office my second year, and I'm thinking, like, what did I do? Right? Like, I'm getting a "See Me" from the dean of journalism. And he goes, "Listen, son," he goes, "you've got a gift." He said, "You need to get out of journalism school." He said, "You write beyond the level of kids that have to stay here for 4 years to learn how to write. So get out, go do something else." And so it was crazy advice at the time. So I got out, switched businesses majors, and I really didn't start pursuing my love of writing and journalism until my mid 30s when I got into the digital marketing space and got licensed to do unlimited kind of stuff at that point. So that was my journey, was like getting talked out of what I really wanted to do by somebody who had good intentions, but pushed me into a more business and sales career. I always think about that pivotal moment. What would have happened if I had told him, no, screw yourself?
I always find that to be an interesting formative space because when I was in college, it's fascinating to me now because I hear my daughter's stories and harkening back to my days, and a lot has changed, but really not a lot has changed. It's just repackaged, right? And so you have good professors, you have bad professors, you have some professors who are just there to live out their experience. And I always fondly remember the ones that had the biggest impact on me, right? Those people who were the formative ones, and it sounds like this one, whether you knew it at the time, was one of those. When you look back at this trajectory in terms of people that really influenced you, whether it was professors, whether it was your parents, whether it was friends, can you encapsulate who those people are if you had to put them on one hand?
Sure. It's my parents for sure. On one hand, kind of pushing me to be self-employed and independent and follow their lead because that's all I knew growing up. Definitely this professor that I met pushed me in a different direction. And then a third professor in my master's program was probably the hardest human being I'd ever met to get along with. But boy, he just showed me a different level of myself that I was able to find, because here was a guy that would push you and not accept anything else other than your absolute best. And then professionally, probably the person I've been around and it's had the biggest impact on me is somebody you may know. He's in the brand space. His name is Roy H. Williams.
Hmm.
Roy is the wizard of ads, and Roy really stands for creativity and joy and fun. And that was a great lesson for me to hear as a young digital marketer, to hear that that was more important than the technical stuff, the nerdy stuff. And
Hmm.
so Roy's influence on me has been really profound 15 years later. And I talk about stuff I learned with him a lot in terms of just it's freed me up creatively to be who I wanted to be. So,
Do you ever think about, I love that you said your parents. I don't get that answer a lot anymore, which is odd because you would think that your parents would be some of the really influential, formative pieces of a lot of people's lives. They weren't for me, just as a frame of reference. But I love that you said that because that's something that I try to do now as a parent to my children. I've always tried to not replicate the errors that I observed growing up in my own household. When you look at yourself as a parent, I'm just wondering, what are some of the things that you've shifted? And I'm going somewhere with this question. When you look at yourself as a parent now, and you have four children, is that what you said at the beginning?
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you look at, were you an only child or did you have siblings?
Oh no, I've got three younger brothers.
Okay. I'm one of 12.
Oh gosh.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
When you look at your upbringing as a child and you now compare and contrast you as a father, are there things that you can emphatically point to? This definitely drove how I parent, and these are things that I'm completely antithetical on because of the lesson I learned around that. And if so, what are those?
100%. And I'm not ashamed to admit I've done a lot of therapy around some of those points. The reality is I had really loving parents, good intentioned parents, but when there were a lot of things about them that I role modeled without realizing I was role modeling, like I said, being self-employed, being independent. There's a lot of specific things like watching my dad, the way he ran his business about charging a premium and doing things the right way and not cutting corners that I just thought were normal. So a lot of that stuff I adopted and those have been good traits. But on the other hand, there was a lot of times when I was told, you aren't doing it right, you're not doing it well enough, you can't do this or that. So there was some really pivotal points in my life that I was given limiting advice that really kept me from being confident enough to pursue what I wanted to do. So that's been pivotal for me as a parent to look for those opportunities that when something comes up, even though I may as a parent be inclined to say you shouldn't do that or you can't do that, to not say that, to say you
Hmm.
can do it. If you want to do it, you need to go for it, and to try and be take that constraint out of what a kid could do. Because I think the one thing I've noticed after raising five kids is like they all come out differently and it's all about what they want to be driven to do at the end of the day. And that's been my biggest thing is to try and just support them and what they want to do and not imprint my fear or my anxiety or my personal issues or my preferences on top of that.
You mentioned therapy, and I want to go there for a minute because for me, it's been a very long journey in the space of trying to uncover my shadows that I had learned, my learned behaviors, the context of my upbringing, the trauma. I mean, we're just going to be honest, the trauma that my father specifically had instilled in all of us, and breaking all that down. And as my therapist says, we're unpacking the baggage and replacing it. And so, I guess the space that I'm fascinated with, because we're both fathers, is that fine line between pushing your children, guiding your children, mentoring your children, and being the disciplinarian. What's just your philosophy on that in terms of how you've parented and how that has carried over into how you run your business and the sort of those sort of subtleties and nuances?
So the big that's a great question. The biggest thing has been for me is learning to let natural consequences do a lot of the parenting that I felt like my parents tried to do for me. And then I made the mistake with my oldest one trying to prevent him from making mistakes or getting in the way from that. Because I feel like the one like truism I think I've learned is that the sooner you let a kid learn the consequences of a behavior, the better off they'll be as a person, as a human, because they will learn that decisions have consequences one way or the other. And while I don't want to let my kid grab a hot pan and necessarily get a third-degree burn, it short of physical, like imminent danger, there's a thousand things after that I think we as parents tend to jump into that we should let the kids sort out and learn from. And I hate to say it, but painful mistakes are good mistakes in some cases. I feel like as a kid, I was always told you can't do it, you shouldn't do it, don't do that. There was always either criticism, judgment, or limits. And in my case, I think that having learned early on that I could make decisions and maybe seeing what maybe those decisions wouldn't have led to negative consequences. Maybe they would have led to positive. So I think being allowed to learn that at a younger age would have been a great skill for me to have. And so I've tried to really instill that in my kids as I go. And you do better with it as you get experience as a parent, because like my youngest one, I feel like I've evolved with that. And he's a very free spirited, forward thinking, out of the box kid. And doesn't seem to have a lot of the stuff that maybe my older one has. So
Mhm.
it's interesting to watch as you go with that. But I think that's probably my biggest thing that I've learned. And I've learned that with clients. Client that wants to argue with you about something, you're making a recommendation. This is what I'm seeing. Great. Don't do it. Here's the caveat: these decisions have consequences, and that's okay. I'm not taking responsibility for it. So we're going to do it. Go forward with it. And sometimes clients have done it, and it's been turned out to be the right decision, and we had a laugh about it. And other times it hasn't worked out, and they go, "You were right," and that's okay. But I think that's part of allowing growth is that we're going to see what happens from this, and not try to prejudge the outcome by trying to control everything.
Yeah, and so that control situation, this natural consequence idea, is a forced consequence, is a control consequences where you're either manipulating the situation for them so they're not learning, right? Or if they still make the mistake, you're coming down upon them with overbearing disciplinary tactics. And do you have employees or contractors or people that
I
you work
do.
with?
Yep. All of the above.
So I'm curious because I'm fascinated by, I think I was taught growing up by MBAs and business coaches and things of this nature that you separate your personal and your professional lives. And there's some grain of truth to that in terms of what people see. But I've always, and at least I've now come to this belief that who you are as a leader in your business and who you are as a leader at home, your personal side, your professional side, they clearly collide. Like you can't run a business successfully if you're a piece of shit as an individual. I'm just sorry, you just can't. And so, in terms of your leadership and in terms of, we just talked about this natural consequences, do you see the parallels in how you work with your collaborators and how you work with your employees and in how you raise your family?
Yeah, no question. And to your point about you, if you're a piece of shit at home, I've seen plenty of people that were in a work environment where they felt like that boss was a piece of shit, and that's they didn't want to work for that person. They were felt like they were stuck or trapped there. But that dynamic doesn't inspire people to want to
Mhm, mhm.
be there part long term or part time. Yeah. The one thing that's been a little bit easier for me was that just age wise, by the time I reached the point in business where I was ready to have employees and contractors and stuff, it was my second career. And so I really was in a position to where age wise, it felt pretty natural to have younger employees coming in because I could then treat them some I hate to say treat them like children, but treat them more like I have treated my kids, just in that let them learn, give them opportunities to grow and force them. And this is the one thing I do force my employees to do, force them to tell me what they want to do and how they want to grow. Rather than telling them, here's your path to growth, it's what do you want to do to grow? Especially if I like that employee or that freelancer and like their vibe and like their energy, I want to let them be in control of what their growth is to say, show me what you want to do. What's your career path? What do you want to learn? What skills do you want to develop? And it's they're like, wow, really? And when it's because the one thing I think the one thing I've learned about kids and parents and employees to that end is that when it's their idea, they're 1,000% more behind it than when it's your idea. And I think that's like a universal truth. And I think there's an art to letting people think it's their idea, and maybe what you do is you give them three or four choices that are your idea and they get to pick one, and that's fine, but that's still then their idea that they picked and went forward with it.
So, how do you handle a situation like that? And I appreciate that perspective, by the way. I don't think that I've always managed that way. I came early in my career, and this is just being transparent again. Early in my career, I adopted a lot of the methodologies that I had learned in my behaviors with my father, which was a very forced, unnatural consequence. There's only one person in charge. It was like a
Yeah.
dictatorship.
And I think we all have been in that work environment. It's not a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I had a lot of success with that on paper early on. And I will confess that. Fast rise, meteoric rise to positions of leadership. But I don't think the people that were managing me were good leaders because they never stopped to take a look at some of the flack and the fallout that came from that. Does that make sense? And the bridges that I had burned and the relationships that I had soured and those sorts of things. And so it was a long recovery for me to figure that out, that leadership doesn't require you burning bridges and stepping on people, right? And I
Yeah.
used to think that was the model. And it's crazy because I never had any mentors or anybody that guided me anything differently. I'm curious. So back to that original question, I love that you said you let people step into their own power because they're more inclined to have autonomy around that, right? And more excitability around it. But what if they have a nebulous nature and they're not really sure and they're just like floating around, whether they're a kid or an employee? How do you manage something like that?
Yeah, when we do that, when I run into that, and we run into that a lot, I think that the thing at that point is just to limit the choices. And that doesn't mean that you tell them you have to do A, but like was saying earlier, okay, you're because I got to be honest with you, I think what you're describing is becoming a bigger problem with these kids that are growing up with phones, where they're just completely overwhelmed by the idea of choice.
Yeah.
And so I think what I have found is that limiting the choices at that point to something that's A, B, C, they can pick one of three at that point and still feel like they have some control in the choice. And I don't ever approach it to get, it's only these three, right? It's here's three suggestions, and then they might go, well, I looked at your three and I picked number four, and that's
Mm.
fine. But you're helping them limit the choices at that point and cut through the overwhelm, because I really think our generation, the biggest challenge for the next 5, 10 immediate future is helping people learn to make decisions from a state of being overwhelmed and not just having no idea what to do next. Because I'm watching, you got teenagers, I'm watching these kids coming up, and it's not as bad with kids in their 20s, but it's bad. It's not as bad as what I'm seeing for these teenagers right now. It's these teenagers are really in a bad place of feeling overwhelmed and unable to make a decision.
which is ironic when you stop and look at it on paper because the confluence of availability of options, you would lend itself to thinking, I've got all these options I can pick from a smorgasbord of the buffet here. But in the process of access, for me, when you're describing that, the only thing that popped into my mind, I do a lot of traveling. I go to Mexico. It's like my second home. And then I come back to America and I'm like, dude, there is literally 726 toothpaste options on this shelf right now. When I go to
Yeah.
the store in Mexico, there's one, and you're lucky if there's one. It's so the American idea of opportunity and the American idea of choices is vastly different from other parts of the world, not just based upon availability, but just a mindset. And so that's interesting. And what you said there was cool too, because they picked option four and lended yourself to still around the idea of autonomy. They still were able
Hmm.
to make a choice. So I like that space. What does limiting the choices in terms of psychologically do for an individual, though? I'm curious from your space around that. What's the psychology going on? So you presented a case of your children. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you have your children and they have their phones and they have all this like instant gratification concept, like literally at our fingertips. And now ChatGPT is just completely, in my opinion, completely bastardizing this concept, this philosophy. But anyhow, when you're limiting somebody's choices, what's happening psychologically in that leadership choice?
From my side, what I'm doing is I'm using my mentorship and experience skills at that point to try and say, based on what I know about this person, these are things I think would be good alternatives to consider without saying like my college professor did, you need to quit and do something else. That's like a if then
Mm.
thing. And I've tried to avoid that because ultimately that choice maybe wasn't the right choice, but I got talked into it by somebody I trusted. So my framework has been if they're unable to decide is to use what I know to help them say, here are some things that you can start to focus on. Because what it's been my experience, because I'm in the digital marketing space and then I do some coaching, and it's like when you get people in digital marketing, you could do anything, right? Oh, you could go everywhere from web development to content writing to influencers to this and that. So even in that realm, it's still very broad, and not everyone is there. Not everyone's skill sets are amenable to every one of those windows. So if I
Mm.
know sort of what your tendencies are, and if you're an extrovert, an introvert, a detail idea person, like if I have some of that, then I can suggest a spectrum of that to look in that maybe you're better compatible with. And if you find one that's on the outside, great, but it's helping them bring some sense of order to their brains.
Mm.
Because I my wife laughs at me. I can't go to Costco. I can't.
Mm.
I cannot walk around Costco. It's too much. Like I walk into Costco, it's 30 feet tall. Everything's got 10 things. And I'm like, I don't need this much. Like my brain shuts down.
Yeah.
And so I'm very aware of that now, just in the fact that like when we have unlimited choices, sometimes that doesn't lend itself to making the right choice or the best choice. And the one thing I've started to notice is that when you have to sit there and sort through this many choices to make this decision, you spend a lot of mental energy doing that.
Mm.
It consumes you at home. I've read like some of these guys who are like ultra successful have a closet full of four kind of outfits because I think it was Steve Jobs. I don't want to spend mental energy trying to make some unimportant decisions. And so I think that's something that our people don't maybe realize is how much mental energy is going into trying narrowing down. Even just the process of helping someone narrow down has a lot of value because you then save them a lot of mental energy that they can start focusing elsewhere.
Yeah, I love that. I can speak from experience on that. When I got divorced about 15 years ago, and prior to that, I was living the big life. That's what I call it. I worked in the corporate world and made a lot of money doing absolutely nothing purposeful for myself, and had the big home and had the nice cars and all those sorts of things. And then I got divorced, and part of it was a catalyst because I had to give up half of that, right? And then I just remember moving out of that home because I just thought, why am I staying in this 5,500 square foot home? I have two kids. What am I doing with all this space? And so it was funny. It was a cathartic experience. In the process of moving, I got rid of literally everything that didn't serve a purpose right then and there. I just made a decision. If this hasn't been touched in 6 months, it's gone. And I either donated it, threw it away, or gave it to the Goodwill. And I remember moving into the new home, and I remember this. My daughter was 5 years old, and she walked into the living room. She's like, "Dad, where's all the furniture?" I was like, "Why do we need 26 chairs in here? Like we had rocky chairs and recliner chairs and sofa chairs." First, it was bad design, bad feng shui, but nonetheless, I was like, "Why do we need all these things?" So you're right, and in the process of call it wisdom, call it whatever it was, but I remember in the process of minimalizing things for myself, my life started to take on a whole completely new trajectory in terms of just simplifying the choices that I was making, the pursuit of my career. Like I left corporate in that space, and I don't know if that was the reason why. There was other reasons, but I do like the idea of the simplification.
So
What?
one thing on that, just as a funny aside, I know your listeners are not dogs. We now have 4 dogs in the house, and I've gotten to be pretty good friends with a dog whisperer who's helped us training. And they talk about the same thing with pets. Limit their choices. It's okay for a dog to be in a kennel. You're not punishing the dog. You give the dog a safe space. So they even talk about that in training, how simplifying and making things smaller creates order
Mm-hmm,
that allows them to function better. And
mm-hmm.
I just think there's our world right now is getting very like this. So whatever we can do to help this just makes it easier to function. And I'm not suggesting like people only should get one choice and we should be militaristic about it. But I think there's a real art in taking this and making it this,
Oh, for sure, for sure. I hear exactly what you're saying. If you had to encapsulate it into an Andreism, what does that sound like? I want to give you opportunity and autonomy, but at the same time, I don't want to overwhelm you with so many choices that you just become completely useless in the decision making process. What does that sound like to you if you were talking to one of your employees or your children around that?
Yeah, for me, it's always good, better, best. I'm always talking to people about let's do good, better, best. Like what would be nice, what would be better, and what's the best case scenario. And let's just skip all the other possibilities right now
Mm,
because
mm.
you could always go to those other things later, but let's pick one because good, better, best is always, I think, a good framework to work from because you can at least then again evaluate 3 things without trying to evaluate 500. You'll run into this when you talk to kids about where we're going to go to college. Like my wife sat my daughter down and helped her write out a pros and cons list, and we did good, better, best with the whole thing. When she made a decision, she felt good about it. So that's a good example. And the same thing works with employees, with teammates, with everything.
I love that philosophy because I do the same thing with my kid when she was making her college choices. We made a priority list. What are the good attributes of this school? What are the things that don't really jump out at you and make you feel joyful inside? And then let's just cross it off the list until we get narrow it down to the one. I love that. A lot of the things that you've been saying so far in the 30 minutes on the call have been centered around really good leadership philosophies. And I'm just curious what your take on leadership is. I write for a magazine here in Charlotte, and the editor asked me if I would put together a concept piece on an op-ed piece on leadership. And at first I was like, yeah, I'm a great leader. I'll sit down and write. And I really started to sit down and write. I'm like, there are so many different directions that I could take this, right? And so I went back and I said, hey, I'm going to interview 25 CEOs. And this was a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to interview 25 CEOs, and I'm going to basically take everything that they've said and I'm going to condense this into my version of leadership based upon theirs so that we can see where the parallels were. And before I tell you what the one common theme was, I want to hear because there was literally in every all 25 CEOs, there was one common theme that jumped out. So
Wow.
yeah, I know, phenomenal. And so I'm curious if you had to define leadership, how would you define it?
Yeah, mine would be just based on my experience between personal and business would be coaching. I feel like my job and my role is to help get the best out of the people around me. And the way that I do that has to be to give them some structure, give them some advice, but also give them plenty of opportunity to do it on their own, to learn on their own. And the more it's like I said earlier, the more it's their idea, the more they do it, the more they then take. And what I found is like with employees is like when they accomplish something, you help them get a framework, they accomplished it, they bought into it. Their pride in that and their desire to show what they've learned by let me take on some additional work, let me do this for a client, let me do this for the company. Like their desire to show that off is unmatched. And
Hmm.
I think that's when you see the best out of people is when they want to share what they've learned and what they know and what they've done. And I always think back to I had a kid when I was coaching baseball, and this kid could never catch a ball. His mom's don't let him play first base. Whatever happens, he break his nose. So all season, like this kid kept working at it, and he finally last game, like I'm letting him play first base. And the very first kid hit a dribbler to the pitcher, and he literally underhanded it to my guy, and he caught it on first base. You would have thought this kid went to the moon. So we finished the inning. He came off and he grabbed me, hugged me. Thank you for showing me how to play first base. And I'm like, that's the epitome of taking a person. You can do this,
Yeah.
like we're not going to put you in a dangerous spot, but that kind of stuff like sticks with me because I don't think that kid's any different from an employee or a contractor or anybody else that you're around. It's could have told him no, could have told him that doesn't work, but it's like you put him in a situation where they can learn it and do it, and then it's their thing. Then next to him, I can play first base,
Hmm.
right? So it's the same kind of thing, I think, in terms of how I've approached this, and that's worked really well for me.
Before I tell you what the common theme was, did you arrive at this by accident, this perspective on leadership, or do you think this was a learned behavior over time? And were there counterintuitive moments in your life where that wasn't really the application that you put into place?
I think in my case, I knew it. I intuitively knew it, and I kept getting messages from other people that it didn't need to be that way. My dad did not manage people that way in his business, and I can't say I ever had a role model for that. I just kept finding that the most effective I saw people was when I handled it in those situations. And that's really what, as a business owner, I've learned is I really want, if I'm going to bring in a person, I want them to be operating in their most effective capacity. And where I've seen it not work is when somebody's in the wrong role or it's the wrong person. They're the wrong mindset, the wrong temperament, like they're not part of the organization, whatever it is. They shouldn't be there. That's the only time it's failed for me. And those are just mistakes in other areas. That doesn't mean the style doesn't work. It just means those people weren't the right fit for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. So it's fantastic what you said because the common denominator in all 25 of my interviews was servant leadership, is building up other people. And true leadership is not about yourself. It's how A, you respond in situations, is how do you manage, but how do you make the choices that you make in response to others so that at the same time, everyone is growing as a team, as a collaboration, whether it's in your family, whether it's your friends, whether it's your partner, whether it's your employees. Every single one of them had this. And they did not know, of course, what other people were saying.
That's
But there was,
fascinating.
I know it is pretty fascinating that all 25 of these said that. And I don't know if that's indicative of leaders across the world, but I would imagine most would probably have that in their space. The successful leaders, I guess I would say, goes that. In terms of in the terms of this world, we've touched on this a little bit, and I'm fascinated by this conversation. This idea of what a successful person is, and there's a lot of different metrics around that, right? You can monetarily, freedom based, whatever it might be. Some people are individual based, and some people are like, how many possessions do I have? But in terms of success, and I don't even really like the word success, but if you had to take a look at sort of your life so far and define the successful moments, if you will, and then look at that and then encapsulate it in like an organic definition of what success or freedom means to you. What does that look like as a leader and a CEO and a father and the things that you've done so far?
I just had one this weekend. The moments for me where I define success are when I see somebody that's, I'll just say, under my care, right, under my direction,
Mm-hmm.
achieve and do something that they either didn't think they could do or were unsure about them doing, and then see the pride in them of having done it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the growth. And watching, for me, the highest level of success is watching somebody I've worked with uh, grow, and you get to be there to see it. And those are the moments where I'm like, okay, I've succeeded. This is success because I've helped this person develop a skill, a personality trait, whatever it is that they will carry with them, not only their whole lives, but they'll teach and instill in others, and they'll share with the world. And I think that's without question the best drug I could ever get in terms of knowing that it's working. Because I know if that happens, everything else that we've set in place will take care of itself, whether that's a kid doing something or an employee or a contractor or any of those situations. It always means the outcome that we're after
Mm-hmm.
is coming because that person's going to be doing the part that their role in that part to make that happen.
It goes back to that servant leadership that you just described a few minutes ago. But I'm going to put you on the line for this a little bit deeper. So you're standing at the pearly gates of wherever you go in this afterlife, and you are asked to describe you as an individual and what you've accomplished that has made you worthy of moving past this next level. What does that look like for you, Andre Savoy, individually?
For me, it means that I've touched a lot of people's lives that and made them, allowed them to live a better life and to
Mm.
spread joy and happiness and their brilliance. Because I read a book a couple of years ago with my wife, and I read it together, called The Big Leap. It's about the zone of genius from Gay Hendricks. Have you read that or heard
I
of
have
him?
not, and I've heard of the individual. I've not read the book.
So Gay Hendricks, his core message is that each of us has a zone of genius
Hmm.
and something that we were put on this earth to do that we do better than the most people. And when we work and when we live in that zone of genius, that we are our most successful version of ourselves, whether that's
Hmm.
financially, personally, whatever. And that what winds up happening is a lot of people never get there, never pursue that because they're afraid or they're told they can or whatever. And so the book is just basically about finding the courage and the skills to live in your zone of genius. And for me, standing at the pearly gates, I just look at myself as, look at all the people I helped find their zone of genius. And by doing that, it helped me get where I wanted to go. And
Mm.
that's really what what my goal is when we kind of work walking around and all the things we do. It's to kind of push people to do that, create a system that allows that, and everything else takes care of itself.
Mm. I love that. What would your children say about you if I asked them about you? If you had to describe your father, what would they say?
I think that they would say that I have been supportive and a role model for them just in terms of making changes and learning to be somebody new, not necessarily having to be the same person that they've always been and evolving. And I think they would say I'm fun because I think it's always been important to me to make sure that we're doing stuff with them. We're having a good time and doing something. No, I don't mean like we avoid chores or whatever, but just that it's that those are because looking back as a father, that's all I ever remember from my dad, like that, because he's been dead for 15 years. And it's I remember the fun parts the most. And it's that's what you have later on. So make sure you focus on that.
Creativity, joy, fun. You said that at the outset of the call.
Yeah.
What would your employees say about you? Same thing?
I just had a conversation with one yesterday, and she was just gushing about how she's grown so much because of what she's learned from me. And so
Mm,
she's just really grateful for having been around me and worked with me and for me sharing what I know with her so that she could grow and evolve. She's in a role she would have never done 3 years ago
mm,
because her confidence and her skills have grown and her world has just expanded. So that's I really strive to leave my employees in that situation where they
mm,
just, he's the best. He's the best boss I've ever had, allowed me the most room to grow. And now I'm here
mm.
mostly because of what I learned there. And that's whatever that is, that's what I'm after.
I always, when I was working in the corporate world, I always was fascinated by the reviews that we had to do every quarter. And I always thought it'd be really fantastic if we could actually review our bosses as well. And I made the suggestion one time to my boss, and he looked at me like I was fucking crazy. I was, don't you think that you would become a better individual if you asked your entire team what they candidly thought about you? And you can make it anonymous so that there's no perfunctory response to this. But
Right.
wouldn't you want to know how your people feel about you? I would just imagine. And I keep thinking I'm watching The Office for the first time, and I don't know if you ever watched The Office.
I never have.
I've never have either, and my family and friends thinks I'm crazy that I've never watched it. But anyway, I started watching it, and there's this one episode where they get bought out or a new boss comes in, and Michael is like the central character. He's the CEO of the office, and they open up the suggestion box, and the suggestion box has been sitting there like an archaic dinosaur for 10 years, but there's a bunch of stacks of papers in there, and every single one of them was like a complaint about the boss, and he's this very unself-aware individual, very like clueless narcissist that just thinks he's the center of the world and everything revolves around him. That's like the point of the show. But I was just, and when I saw the episode, I was like, I can guarantee that if we had the opportunity to share some insights about our bosses, that would have been a more productive company. Because if we're not aware of our own, like we can't read our own labels half the time, right? So it's like we need somebody else to call this out. That's why we have therapists. That's why we have coaches, hopefully, and that sort of thing. So far, everything you've said, man, it's really cool and very cathartic to hear this from leaders. I'm curious, and I want to switch gears a little bit around this idea of the business that you run, and we haven't really had the chance to talk about that. So if you could, what are you doing right now? I've heard you do coaching, digital marketing. Tell me a little bit about your business and your brand, and like what problems are you solving on the universe planet right now?
Yeah. So I founded a digital marketing agency almost 20 years ago that I ran. And last year I exited it intentionally because I wanted to take what I kept finding over and over again was that we were doing one-on-one work with people for different things, and that those messages wound up being repeated over and over again with different clients and different scenarios and different employees. And I really needed to share that on a broader scale.
Mm,
So I really felt called to walk away from the agency and move more into coaching and consulting, where I could share that with larger groups and get the message out, because I just feel like what I've learned I needed to share,
hmm
and doing it on a one-on-one basis was really getting frustrating for me. So I'm at this point, I am doing primarily coaching and consulting. I have a few clients that we consult with, and I'm running a coaching program that really is based on what I've learned over the 20 years of running a marketing agency from both sides in terms of both clients and internally for doing that. But that's really the decision I needed to make, because I'd reached a point of personal burnout with the agency that I just didn't have the drive to do it anymore and needed to honor that and move on. So it's a painful process to go through
mm.
in your early 50s, but just part of life, reinventing yourself again.
I want to come back to that painful process because I wrote something down at the beginning, and but I'm gonna skip this for a minute. You and I are just doing something very similar. I started seeing the writing on the wall. I was missing a lot of my children's lives early on, and I was more of in a service-based industry. I've run the branding agency and content creation agency for almost 16 years now. Wow. And I started getting burnt out in the capacity of like always being knee jerk in that space. And I wanted to have a bigger impact, right? I just wanted to be able to, I've learned a lot in 16 years as an entrepreneur. I've run two businesses, sold one of them. And I feel like I've got a few gifts of things that I've picked up along the way, experiences, et cetera. And so I started repositioning my business and doing personal brand coaching. So helping CEOs like yourself really build the personal side of your business. Because I personally, again, we talked about it before, this intersection of personal and professional is who you ultimately are, right? If you're still in the workforce. And so one of the things that I encounter all of the time, and forgive me a second because I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you. Well done with the mute.
Thank you. Yeah. My producer does not want to hear that. So I've gotten really good at, and I'm still trying to recover. Man, this cold I had was literally just kicked my ass. So forgive me. Where was I going? Oh, one of the things that I have encountered early on in the process of doing this coaching, consulting now with CEOs who are much smarter than me and much more successful, it seems, is this idea of this imposter syndrome concept. And I asked you in the onboarding question because I'm just genuinely curious about how people have dealt with it. You've talked about social media. We live in this digital space where there's just constantly this pervasion, this influence of information slamming us all day long. Turn on your TV, and it's really just focused on everyone else's life, and everyone's living this fantastic life, and everybody's living on boats and yachts and cruising and making all this money. And I'm like, I know that factually, probably about 75% of that is just falsification, but because of the influence that it has on our lives, especially on children, it's created this idea of like, how can I ever be as good as Andre? Look at all the great things Andre's doing. I'll never be Andre. And so
Yeah.
we started to develop these insecurities about ourselves and this idea of imposter syndrome. What's your space? Like what is your, first of all, the first question, what's your space around that concept? And how have you dealt with it individually as a father, as a CEO, and now as a coach, which like you have a huge honor on your hands now. You're guiding other entrepreneurs, other individuals. That's a massive responsibility, right? So
Yeah.
how do you as a leader, father, CEO, entrepreneur handle that concept?
Yeah. Imposter syndrome is a bitch, man. And it doesn't get any easier to deal with. It's a real thing. It's definitely not to be trifled or ignored or dismissed. The way I have dealt with it is through therapy and through a lot of really deep self work. I have a Qigong practice that I do now, do a lot of meditative work, a lot of journaling. So for me, the core thing that I have to do with imposter syndrome is I have to continually remind myself that like at a core level, I'm a good person and I know what I'm doing. My intentions are right. My intentions are good. Doesn't mean I'm not going to screw it up along the way or make mistakes, but it just means that at a core, I'm in good shape. And that's the part that gets battered by at my core, I don't have this many clients as this guy, or I have this bit, whatever. So all those judgments that come in have to just get dismissed. But that's the only way you can do it is build yourself up on the inside. And that's been the only way that I've been able to manage it is no matter what the life challenge was, is to go back to the core thing. And then because at a really deep level, I do trust myself and I do believe that I have something to give. I just catch myself allowing the self-doubt to creep in and when it happens. And that's where that imposter syndrome can really wreck you if you don't watch it.
I think not a lot of people are actually familiar with this term. So I'm going to just give my definition of what it is. And at the core of it, it's the insecurity, right? Or it's the disbelief that you have the authority or you have the experience or you have the power. I was sitting at a business networking event on Monday and I actually dropped this question to somebody. And I would say half of the room had never even heard of the concept
Oh,
before. So I had,
really? Of imposter
yeah.
syndrome?
Yeah, and so it's pretty self-explanatory. I thought when you hear it. So I was trying to explain it, and it was crazy. There were people that were floored in the room, and they were like, "I have it, I have it, I have it, I have it, I have it." And I see it all the time when I'm working with a coach right now who's trying to launch a new business like you, and it centers around coaching. And I just really am struggling with showing up on social media. I'm really struggling with going out and giving advice to people because like why would they want to listen to me? And I was like, let's just take a look at your trajectory for a minute. Has what you've done so far worked for you? And she's like, yeah, I'm really good. But how do I know that will work for other people? I'm like, there's somebody out there that this would work for. Even if
Yeah.
it's just one person, let's start with one person that you think would appreciate your perspective, your zone of genius. And let's start sharing that with them and let's just see where that goes. And let's build confidence on it and let's build from that and grow. And she's just, I'd never thought about that before. So it's funny to me, the things, and I'm not taking any zone of genius credit for that, but it's funny to me we often make these assumptions about what we know and we think it's everybody else should know this as well and there's downsides to that as well. Are there any elements in your personality or in your career or your trajectory where you just made this assumption about something, well, my wife should know that like I know that, or my kids, that sort of caused you a little bit of chaos and turbulence that you had to create some self-awareness around and be like, you know what, I fucked that up a little bit, let me back up a bit?
Yeah, my wife has actually done a nice job of beating that into my head about it being an assumption. So if you stop me if you've heard this, but she's assumptions make an ass out of you and me.
Yeah.
I've learned it's been a hard lesson to learn that when you assume, and this goes back to at a very deep level, like when my journalism professor talked me out of something, I assumed he knew what he was talking about. I assumed his advice was good. I didn't question it. I didn't make my own decisions about it. I just assumed if he's telling me this, I can trust him. And you know that those are assumptions. I have learned, I think the hardest thing in life, especially today with the phones and the imposter syndrome and just social media and all that, I think the hardest thing to life is to just say, I don't know what's going to happen.
Mm.
And I'm going to trust that something good is going to come out at the other end. Like to have a positive expectation that whatever decision you're going to make is going to be positive in some way, even if there's a painful learning experience behind it. That's still the, like you and I have been through divorces, right? Nobody says, let's get a divorce. That'll be great. But a divorce, you can look at a divorce as like it wrecked my life, or you can look at a divorce as it was a really painful 2, 3 years, but I've come through on the other side. So there was a positive outcome to it. I think that for me, as a person and a leader, I think the hardest skill to really hone, but maybe my best served skill has been to learn to just trust the decision that something positive will come out of it, even if I don't know what that positive will be at the moment. And when
Mm.
you reach that point, that's when I think you can make decisions from a place of freedom without worrying about the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt about it. And I'm not saying it ever happens fully, but that's where I've worked towards. And the further I've gotten along that, the more closer I've gotten to just having the daily life existence that I'm much more content with than I was even 2 years ago running an agency.
Hmm. This idea of detaching from the outcome of things.
Yeah, that's another way to put it for sure.
Yeah, because when we get this fixation on this outcome, if you will, it's just a preconceived notion of how we think it should go, and rarely does it go. And when we get caught up in that space, we're not controlling. We're out of control in how we could respond to a situation. I see it that way because, again, we can only control what is in within our locus, right? And I always tell this to my kids, like, dude, there's literally nothing you can do about this right now, but what can you do and how do you respond to it? So I love that you said that, this whole idea. You've talked a little bit about your therapy and your, I'm just going to call it your shadow work. And if you may, if you don't want to go here, just tell me to move on. But I'm always fascinated by people like yourself who have the self-awareness and the introspection to take it to the next level in terms of who they are as individuals and how they show up in the world. I think it's literally the single most important factor to living a full life is the ability to have the self-awareness and the understanding that you might have some demons you just haven't dealt with.
You might
And
see
they
some shit to throw out in the
yeah,
trash.
yeah, and they might be fucking up some things that you should probably fix, bro. And I had to learn the hard way. Divorce was my biggest lesson in my entire life because I was not a good husband. Honestly, truthfully, I was not a good husband. I didn't really like how I showed up in that space. And because of the divorce, which was, I'll take full credit for, it forced me to take a long, hard look at how I was showing up in the world in literally every element. And I was like, I don't really feel like if I was standing at the pearly gates, that whoever is the master of all things would be like, bro, you did a good job. High five. Let's grow. He'd probably be like, oh no, man, let's start over a little bit here. So when you look at yourself, and I don't think you're gonna have a problem answering this, but again, permission to move forward if you want. What are some of the shadows and some of the demons that you've worked with over the years that have enabled you to see yourself in a different light and show up as a different, more positive human being?
Yeah, I've done a lot of that work. The reality is for me is self-doubt has been probably the biggest. And the self-doubt really goes all the way back to childhood experiences. Over the last year, I've done a lot of work with a therapy called internal family systems. And that's been pretty remarkable in helping get to the bottom of some of those things that I wasn't able to find before, because a lot of the self-doubt and questioning that you have as an adult is usually something related to some experience as a kid. I'm not saying like a young kid, because in the IFS stuff, they'll tell you it could be anywhere up to like your teenage years. But going through that process, I think I realized a lot of it came from there. And there's been a real shift in that part of it has become much easier, much fast. And self doubt, I think, has been the thing that I've been struggled with the most and has kept me, like when I look at like the things that have kept me from being where I wanted to be, it's always rooted there. And that's, it's different things depending on what the situation is, but it always comes back to the same thing. Like, do you trust yourself? Do you trust your judgment? Do you trust that the decision you make is going to be the right one, or that you can handle the consequences from it? And that's been my personal demon that, you know, again, that influences how I deal with employees and coach and deal with kids, because I'm trying to help kids. I'm trying to help those around me. That's ultimately what I'm trying to help them deal with, knowing that if they can overcome that and have the confidence to be who their spirit tells them they need to be, that's the person we want around for whatever the task is, whether it's an employee or or a kid or a account or whatever, a client.
We certainly can't just trust our spirit or our intuition and everything. Like there has to be some level of pragmatism to how you live your life, I'm assuming, right? Like there's data that supports that. What is that fine line between trusting spirit or trusting intuition and still employing some level of clarity that is based upon a pragmatic principles that you've done research on or you've read about or you did the learning on, et cetera? Like what's that fine line?
That's a good question. I think ultimately, I got to be really honest with you. I think that for me, I feel like that gut deep reaction that you have to something is the one that is usually the right one, and that your rational brain winds up trying to talk you out of it the rest of the time. And that's the part that I've learned, is that the more I listen to that quiet voice for whatever the issue is, that's usually the right answer, even though maybe it's not the rational thing, because I just feel like so I mentioned Roy Williams. Roy probably knows more about psychology than any marketer I've ever met. And Roy says the emotional brain makes the decision and the rational brain justifies it.
Mm.
And it's a simple thing to say, but it's a really hard thing to put into practice on a daily basis. What exactly does that mean? But it's like the emotional brain or our heart really usually knows what needs to be done. It's just whether or not we have the courage or the balls to go through with it. And like I said, I've seen it firsthand over and over again. My divorce is a good example. It doesn't make rational sense to get divorced, but if that's what needs to be done, then that's what needs to be done.
I bet that's a mind fuck for you, if I don't mind saying, because this idea of self doubt being your biggest demon, but then simultaneously to that, you're saying trust your first gut. But if your first gut demon is sitting on their shoulder saying, no, bro, that ain't the right answer. And then he's over here saying, yeah, it is. And you're like, no, I don't believe myself. Oh, no, it is. It's like a interesting discourse, I imagine, going through your head as you
Lots of
starting to learn.
therapy.
Yeah, exactly. I've been diving into therapy lately. I'm going to look into this internal family systems. One of the things I've been focusing on with my therapy is regression therapy and hypnosis and like the subconscious and the conscious and how the two interact. And like our beliefs, for example, are the framework of how we live our life. And if our beliefs are based on unfounded beliefs or demons or baggage that just doesn't serve us, then we need to change our belief system because it's currently the bad operating system. And I've like really been diving into this stuff through hypnosis and regression therapy. And I've never cried so much in my life. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I've never cried so much in my life. And my therapist is, let it go, man. Just let it release. Like, just let it release. So I love hearing that other men are going through these sorts of things, because one of the things that I have seen, and I work with a lot of men, is that this inability to be vulnerable, this inability to be self-aware, and they may go home and talk about it and journal about it, but they don't want to really share it with other men or share it with other audiences. And this is just a personal question, because I've been really diving into going to retreats and stuff that are more centered around men and like their
Mm-hmm.
development, because I feel like men need that camaraderie, and we're being thrown into these silos of like separatism and competition and all these things, and like we've gotten away from like this idea of collaboration and camaraderie and like growing as men together. I'm just curious what your take on that is.
I love it. I'm part of a group. We meet once a month. It's a men's circle. We have one of the guys has a big piece of property, and he keeps a dedicated space in the back where we have fire. And it's about a 2 hour, we'll go into Edens on a Friday, and it's about a 2 hour deal where we'll do some breath work, a little breath work. And then we usually have one thing that's some kind of a physical challenge that we haven't done before. For instance, we did ice baths this summer, just something that makes you uncomfortable physically. And then after that, we sit around the fire and we usually have a guided topic. I guess it's a small group, but there's anywhere from 8 to 12 of us that'll show up on a given month. But it's really powerful, man, to have guys just like you said. I think guys lead with their chest and lead with their head. Like, I got to take the battering. I got to be the
Both
blunt force
heads.
for things. And to be able to let that down and then just have like real guy friends that you don't have to impress, that you don't have to say, oh, who's making more money, who's got the
Yeah.
bigger shit, who's
Yeah.
got whatever. It's been really nice. So that's been about 6 months, I guess, I've been in that group, and
That's
that's I've made really I made better friends in there than I have in 20 years of beating around with just guys that you run into and keep everything superficial with. So it's hard to let your guard down. It's hard to find guys that want to talk about that want to, because a lot of guys are not in that space, and that's okay. I'm not saying that they're better or worse, but I'm just saying it's definitely a different level of connection when you can talk about some of that stuff and be honest, rather than just sort of bullshitting and acting you have all the answers or you've done everything perfect or you're and I went through this. Like when I realized I was in a miserable marriage, and people are like, oh, I can't believe you guys got divorced. Y'all had the perfect marriage. I'm like, geez.
If you had any idea.
Yeah, no, but it's just that's my point. It's like, what front do we put up for everybody to where everybody thinks your life is perfect, and where secretly it's completely crumbled.
Because that's how we've been trained.
I posted something on social media. I started this little challenge 6 months ago where I was going to just post real stuff. I wasn't going to be like everything all rosy. And it wasn't because I was trying to prevent a certain front. It just was just how it was. So I posted this post and just said, hey, I haven't been real authentic with this. And I said, from now on, I promise you guys I'm going to be authentic. And I had a picture of me. I hadn't shaved and had a hat on. And it was a longer post. There was a little bit more to it than that. But I got 50 messages, 50 texts. Dude, are you okay? Are you all right? What's going on? Everything okay with you and Lily? And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm just telling you, like, I'm now prepared to say I'm going to just be authentic. I don't, not everything's positive. That's all I said in the post is like, not everything's positive. I'm going to be authentic. And people are like, are you all right?
Like, it's alarming and refreshing at the same time to most people.
Yeah, it was just funny.
Yeah. We haven't been trained. We've literally been trained to robotically only show our best side, to robotically only compete for the biggest prize and then be proud of that. And in the process of squashing everyone else, that's the purview we share with the world. I made a decision. I love that you said that. I'm going to check you out on this is on Instagram.
I did it on Facebook, yeah.
Facebook. I made a decision several years ago that I was only going to show up for my truest self. And I talk about a lot of messed up things on my Instagram. I try to be inspirational, but it's amazing the response that I've gotten from it in terms of just sharing like my own struggles and turmoils, and people being like, people will send me DMs and it's like, dude, I had no idea there were other people that had these sorts of things. I just love that you're talking about it. I really appreciate that space. It's just this really cool thing. In our last part of the call, I want to talk about something that's obviously near and dear to my heart, and it sounds like it is to yours, and this idea of branding, and we'll finish up real quickly through this. But one of the things that I've learned in both my professional life as a corporate executive and now running businesses for the last 15 years is this idea that our brand is not the shiny and the glossy. It's not the website. It's not this perfect logo or these pretty colors that we've just thrown together. That's like a mishmash of fake social media. But our brand is literally everything that we are. It is our messaging. It's our core of what we believe. It's our values. It's the problems that we solve. It's our customer journey. It's how we answer the phone. It's literally the perception that other people have about us. And I know that you agree with this. In terms of the brand itself that you've built, and let's talk about the old one first for 20 years. What was branding to you early on as you ran your business? How did that evolution change?
Branding to me in the beginning was about presenting the brand that I thought people needed to see. And branding, as I gained more confidence in being authentic, became a statement of just who I was differently and who our company was differently than at our root. And you said the words "we believe." Roy Williams teaches an exercise called "We Believe." And I learned this about 15 years ago. And ever since I learned that exercise, that has become the cornerstone of the way I approach branding, is that we believe is about articulating your beliefs, but doing it in a tangible, observable way that doesn't rely on fluff words. You might say, we believe. I have a client that is a water park. Could say a zip line park. We believe in fun, right? Family fun, just stupid stuff like that, which is what everybody does, versus saying something like, we believe in 2 clips, and gravity. So you're talking about specific things that people can then see themselves doing that. Or another, this air conditioner client, we believe in screwing in the bolts that other AC guys leave behind. So you could say we believe in quality workmanship, or you could say we believe in, we make sure we clean up the other stuff the other guys don't do. So being specific about the way you function, the way you handle yourself, what you think about, being specific about that in a way that another person can see and observe creates trust and authenticity, because it eliminates all the bullshit marketing speak and things that don't mean anything to people, that when they go, we believe it, they're the best in something, quality, this and that, stuff that people can't observe, versus being very tangible about it. And so that's what we got very specific about. And What winds up happening is people who believe those same things or who want those things raise their hand and say, that's me.
And you're not
That's what
trying
I
to
want.
convince, and you're not trying to convince or sell or work with everybody.
No, absolutely not. And that's part of the selection process. We run a small business by anybody's standards. It's not, you're not trying to take on every client in the world. We're not Microsoft and Amazon and those
Yeah.
guys.
And
You
that's
want
part of
to,
your brand. Would you agree? Sorry to interrupt. That's part of your
no,
brand.
no,
Like
no question about it.
what you say is what you attract. Like it's part of your belief system, metaphorically speaking and literally speaking. But in your messaging, you're literally trying to communicate with the persons or person that you want to collaborate with. That is your brand.
Because what you find is that what ends up happening by accident is you want to looking at a client base, and if you have 10 clients and you have 5 you get along with and 5 you don't, those 5 you get along with share your beliefs, your core beliefs as a business, as a person. And then the 5 that don't, you just have a tough time dealing with them for whatever reason, because their belief structure is different. So why not build your marketing around your belief system? That way, the people that are attracted to it, you're eliminating 3/4 of the stress, the dynamics of stress in a relationship by just saying, we agree on the foundation. I hate to use religion, but it's such an easy thing to understand for people. But I ran into a marketing guy recently and he goes, we only work with Christian something. And I was like, okay, I wouldn't start that business and that's not me. But for him, everybody gets on the call. It's like, I'm a Christian business owner of a local business, man. Praise Jesus. And I'm like, great. You've then created, okay, here's our operating platform. We agree on this. I'm like, that's hats off. Like for you, obviously it takes guts to do that, but just saying that's at a very simple level, just so people can, it's like red or green. Like that's
100%.
That's just saying what you believe, and people who believe, if somebody's not into religion and don't want to hear about it, guess what? They ain't calling.
100%.
And that's okay.
I don't necessarily subscribe to that philosophy either, but
Right.
I appreciate the fact that he is, and I teach this concept is this idea of becoming the niche. And instead of trying to fit into everyone else's paradigm or everyone else's box around something that you're supposed to be delivering as a gift to them or a solution to them or whatever it is, you live your values, you live your beliefs. And in the process of doing that, you become the niche that you want to attract. So and so I love that he said that. This whole idea of, and let me go back to this belief thing. So if you had to describe you as a brand, you are the personal brand here, and you had to describe who you are, and this includes your beliefs, this includes your values, this includes the solution that you solve as a coach now in this new business. How would you describe yourself to somebody in terms of trying to attract the right type of person?
Yeah. So, my zone of genius is helping people learn how to think so that they can create the right strategy. That has been the core thing that like I'm really excel at when I get into meetings with people, and the training program that I built and all of that is really designed to teach thought processes and strategic thinking. Because what I found is that no matter what the business, they're really coming to me for guidance because they don't necessarily need help with the specifics of it. Like they know how to run a Google ad or build a website or whatever. So it's not about us having the relationship around, I can build this and I can do this work for you. I have clients that we've had for 20 years, and some of those clients have transitioned into consulting clients just because they appreciate being the clarity of thought and decision making that comes from being around somebody that's that type of thinker. And so that's the skill set that I'm bringing forth and want to share with people, is that part of it, because we can find people to do the detail stuff, but learning how to think and make good strategic decisions based on the right stuff and feel good about those decisions, that's what leads to growth. And the clients that I work with that do that, those are the ones that ride off into the sunset and they're handing their businesses to the second, third generation and that kind of stuff. And the ones that don't get that right, I can tell you right now, I've worked with them. They have big businesses and they run them into the ground, or they're miserable and they're just constantly chasing their tails. I think and honestly, I think that skill is going to be even harder for people to cultivate going forward. We talked about this before. I'm watching with the teenagers. We have people paying thousands of dollars a month to work with us, and they show up to a meeting and they're like, oh man, I'm sorry I'm late. I got on a call and I'm this and that. I'm dealing with some cash flow issues. And it's just, they're in this really negative state of mind coming into a marketing meeting. And we got to stop, like time out. Like we can't proceed like that. This is not how you're going to get anything out of this. But it's funny, like so it's not just the teenagers that are dealing with it, it's everybody. So that's, again, it's trying to hold that space and make that part of the process. And because you can't function from that, you can't function creatively. You can function at a fight or flight kind of place, but you can't function creatively and strategically from that place. You just can't. I've
That
tried, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I've tried as well, and I've had some success with it, but it's not sustainable. The fight or flight constantly in that battle zone, like
Yeah.
constantly, it's not sustainable. Would you say, in terms of the legacy, the impact that you ultimately want to make while you're here doing the work that you're doing, parenting, coaching, advising, entrepreneuring, whatever it is, what would you surmise as the impact you want to leave on the planet?
The impact I want to leave is that people that I have worked with and touched are closer to operating in their zones of genius so that they can contribute to the world in a better way. They are living their best lives, which leaves the world a better place. And I think that when I see those glimpses, when I see that happening, that's when I know I've done something right and I've left a good trail in my path.
Causing the ripple to make a ripple.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yep.
You've dropped a couple of things on shadow work. You gave me the book on internal family systems and a couple of different books. If is there any one book or one podcast or any one individual that you'd like to share with our audience that you think they should follow or listen to or subscribe to or read or something of that nature?
The one would have to be my mentor, Roy H. Williams. He's the Wizard of Ads. He's written 5 or 6 books, and he writes a memo once a week called the Monday Morning Memo. And it's this bizarre little collection of things, but it's always about thought processes. It's always about thinking, and it's always about being brave to do things differently. So their slogan at where at his place is, "We're not a cult." And I love that we're not a cult, because what he's saying is people have said we're a cult, or that you might think we're a cult, or that we're crazy. But saying you're not a cult just invites all kind of curiosity about, well, what are you then? But because they are a cult, but it's a good cult. It's not. So I think that for being around Roy has stood as like this old school marketer who's unabashedly old school, but who also leans into the fact that what's old school doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or
Yeah.
doesn't work anymore, because there's a lot of things that have worked for millennia that are still good ideas. And so there's this race to always have new ideas and new things. And he's just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad. It's still we're still people. When he talks about things in terms of we're people. We're not businesses marketing to businesses. We're people marketing to people and doing business with people. And I just it's been a really big impact for me to get that weekly little shot of perspective and guidance from him. And they teach courses and they do stuff over there, which I've been on their campus, which is pretty magical. And we share a client that we work with together. So I talk to Roy about every 3 weeks. But it's just been a really good influence for me to be around somebody like that. And now that it's been about 10 years that I've been around him, I'm taking some of that into my practice to share that with people and to be that person for other people.
You've inspired me on this podcast. I want to join your man's group for your man's circle via Zoom. I want to be that Max Headroom over there in the corner on the rock.
They just had one last night, so send me a note. I'll invite you next time it comes, because they just did one last night for the first time. So
I love it. I have a similar group, not with just men, but I started a mastermind group concept called Impact, and I'm going to send you an invitation for it afterwards.
okay,
It's a
awesome.
monthly gathering of entrepreneurs, and similar to some of the stuff that you talked about. I wouldn't say it's as vulnerable, but we do the idea around thought leadership and that intersection between personal and professional. So I'll send you an invitation. Hopefully, you could join us. You'd
Yeah,
be a
that's
fantastic
amazing.
addition to it. For those people that are listening to the show, and most of them are entrepreneurs, if you had to distill one piece of advice down to them around their brand and their messaging, what would you give them in terms of one takeaway they can go into their business building right now?
One takeaway would just be brave, but be authentically brave. The businesses that I've seen have the biggest success are the ones where the owners were just not afraid to be themselves, because
Mhm.
being themselves was a little weird, a little goofy, a little different,
Mhm.
but that was what made them stand out. And that was what endeared the people who enjoy that, appreciated that to them. And there are enough people like that in the world that will find you, that will appreciate that and like that. And so I think that's the hardest thing today, is to be a little authentic and a little vulnerable and a little weird. I think it's getting harder, but I think that is maybe the most important thing businesses can do in today.
I love that because in this sea of sameness right now, when everything basically looks the same to me when I go, whether it's the latest algorithm trend or the latest song or the latest dance or whatever it is that's going on social media, the only way to really stand out is to be yourself, to be unique, to be a little bit provocative, to really show up as what you actually say and believe. And as long as you're not being evil or malicious or pernicious or trying to hurt somebody, what's wrong with that grain of truth if you have something to offer? And if somebody can benefit from it, then bro, you've done your job.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Where can people find you, man? I really appreciate a lot of stuff that you've dropped. You gave us a lot of insights. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, easiest way is my website, first name, last name, andresavoie.com, ANDRESAVOIE.com. I've got coaching stuff on there. I've got my peer group that I run. So we've got that stuff. It's all everything we're trying to do now is more in a group setting where we can share and disseminate, learn from each other, and be that leadership role, which is what I've been feeling called to do for the last few years. So
Love it. And all of your taglines and your social and everything will be in the show notes. If anybody just wants to
okay.
look where you look down, look up, I don't even know where it is anymore. You can find it there. So, Andre, I really appreciate your time, man. It's been a great show. You've dropped a lot of information for us, and just really appreciate your insights on everything that you had to say.
Awesome. Thank you. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise.